The first time I saw Karen's limousine, I thought she had hired it for some self-congratulatory HOA event. It was long enough to take up my entire driveway and the better part of the sidewalk, gleaming black under the noon sun like a giant lacquered coffin. I stood there with 2 bags of groceries in my arms, staring at the ridiculous stretch of chrome and tinted glass that now separated me from my own garage. The driver's seat was empty. The back windows were sealed up so dark that for a moment I imagined she was inside, sipping champagne, waiting for me to react. I set my groceries down and walked the length of the car, my pulse ticking faster with each step. When I reached the front, I found a note wedged under the wiper typed in bold, centered, smug. HOA President Business Temporary Use. Do not tow. The signature was her name in sprawling cursive, underlined twice. She had the gall to claim my driveway as her personal VIP parking space and slap the HOA's logo on it like a royal seal. By the time I'd marched to her house, my anger had crystallized into something sharp. She opened the door wearing a silk robe patterned with gold chains, a phone pressed to her ear. Without breaking conversation, she lifted a manicured hand to stop me mid-sentence. "It's just for the afternoon," she said finally, sliding the phone into her pocket with an air of magnanimous indulgence. "Important guests. HOA business. You understand." She didn't even wait for me to answer before closing the door. I didn't understand. What I did was watch. I sat by my upstairs window with a pair of binoculars and a mug of coffee, tracking every visitor. The important guests turned out to be 3 women in sequin dresses carrying shopping bags from upscale boutiques, giggling their way into Karen's living room. Not a clipboard or HOA document in sight. This wasn't business. This was her own private runway show. That night, I called my friend Luke, who ran a local charity for veterans. "Luke," I said, "what would you say if I told you I had a luxury limo you could auction off for your fundraiser?" He laughed, assuming I was joking, until I told him the rest. We hatched a plan over the hum of his old coffee maker, the kind of plan that felt risky and righteous all at once. The next morning, I called the towing company we used at my job site, explained the situation, and showed them the ordinance that gave property owners the right to remove vehicles blocking access without consent. The driver, a broad-shouldered guy named Ray, gave a low whistle when he saw the limo. "That's a beauty," he said, backing his truck into position. "Bet it'll fetch a nice price." It took less than 10 minutes to lift the limo's nose onto the tow rig. By the time Karen stumbled out of her front door, hair in curlers, still in her robe, the back wheels were already chained. "You can't do that," she shrieked, voice slicing through the morning air. "That's HOA property." "Funny," I said, holding up my phone to show the law on the city's website. "Because the registration says it's leased in your name, which means you left your personal vehicle blocking my driveway for over 12 hours. She demanded the tow truck stop, but Ray had already eased the rig into gear. "If you want it back," I told her, "you can talk to the auctioneer at Luke's fundraiser this Saturday. Maybe bid on it like everyone else." The neighborhood caught wind fast. By Friday, people were whispering about the limo incident at the mailbox cluster, chuckling as they passed my house. Carol from next door brought me a tray of cookies and a conspiratorial wink. "About time someone took her down a peg," she said. The twist came when Luke called to say the charity auction had gone viral after a local journalist tweeted the listing. HOA President's limo to be auctioned for Veterans Block Driveway Sparks Community Showdown. The starting bid was already climbing before the event began. When Saturday rolled around, the community center parking lot was packed. The limo gleamed under the sun, polished by volunteers who treated it like a prized artifact. Luke gave a short speech about the cause, weaving in just enough of the backstory to make the crowd buzz with anticipation. Karen arrived halfway through, dressed like she was attending a high society gala, flanked by 2 women I recognized from the shopping day. She tried to storm the stage, claiming the auction was illegal, but the paperwork Luke held up silenced her clear documentation of the tow, the city's release, and her forfeiture of the vehicle after failing to pay impound within the grace period. The bidding was electric. Hands shot up faster than Luke could point. By the end, The limo sold for enough to fund the charity's next 3 projects. The room erupted in applause, not just for the win, but for the poetic justice of watching Karen's smug symbol of status roll away in the hands of someone who'd actually earned it. Karen's face was a study in disbelief and fury. She left without a word, her heels clicking sharp against the pavement. I didn't see her again for weeks, but in that absence, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer, like we'd all taken a collective breath we didn't know we were holding. The limo was gone, but the echo of that day stayed in Maple Crest like a song everyone knew the words to. For weeks, the story floated in whispers between front porches, rode along with the morning joggers, slipped into the laughter of kids playing on the sidewalks. Even people who hadn't been at the auction talked about it as if they'd witnessed it firsthand. And the best part was that every retelling made Karen just a little smaller, her power just a little weaker. I thought she might take the loss as a wake-up call, but I should have known better. Karen didn't see defeat as a lesson, she saw it as a challenge to her authority. Her first move was to fire off a mass email to the entire HOA dripping with faux professionalism. "Recent events involving my personal property," she wrote, "have been grossly mischaracterized in the public sphere. Actions taken against me were malicious, defamatory, and orchestrated by individuals seeking to undermine our community standards." She demanded a special meeting to address misconduct by certain residents and threatened to pursue all legal remedies available. It would have been laughable if not for the fact that some people, out of habit or fear, still treated her like she could make good on those threats. I started seeing a few neighbors keeping their heads down again, rushing past her house instead of lingering to chat. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a limo Anna Maria, it was about whether we let her rebuild the little empire she'd used to control everyone. I wasn't alone in thinking that. Carol knocked on my door one evening with a manila folder under her arm and a fire in her eyes. "Time to finish this," she said. Inside the folder were months of HOA expense reports she'd gotten from a friend on the board, a friend who'd finally had enough of Karen's antics. At first, they looked boring. Landscaping invoices, repair costs, line items for community events. But then I noticed the event hospitality expenses, thousands of dollars in catering, transportation, and guest services, all approved by Karen, all linked to dates that matched her personal parties. That was the hook we needed. We didn't just have her arrogance now. We had evidence of misuse of HOA funds. We reached out to Luke's journalist contact, the one who'd tweeted about the limo. She met us at the coffee shop 2 blocks away, took one look at the reports, and her eyes lit up. "Oh, she's done," the reporter said, snapping photos of the pages. The article dropped 3 days later under the headline, "HOA President Accused of Misusing Community Funds for Private Parties." It was everywhere: Facebook, Nextdoor, even the local TV station picked it up. They interviewed Luke, who spoke not just about the auction, but about how the neighborhood had been living under Karen's self-appointed rule for years. Carol talked about the bin fines, the arbitrary notices, the way people had been intimidated into silence. And then they aired a clip of me, standing in my now-clear driveway, saying, "We're just done. Done with the fear, done with the favoritism. This is our street, not her stage." The backlash was immediate. By the time the special meeting rolled around, the community hall was standing room only. Karen walked in wearing a tailored red blazer and a forced smile, but the energy in the room had shifted. People didn't look at her like they used to, not with deference, but with the flat-eyed patience you give someone who's about to be told enough. Jonathan, the vice president, opened the meeting with an agenda that skipped right over Karen's grievances and went straight to the financial review. When the reports were displayed on the projector, a ripple of anger moved through the room. Line by line, the misuse became undeniable. Each hospitality charge matched a date when Karen had hosted what she called strategic HOA gatherings, none of which had been attended by more than a handful of her personal friends. Karen tried to spin it, claiming these were networking events to attract potential community investors. But the final blow came when Luke stood up from the audience, holding a folder of his own. "Funny thing," he said, "I called the catering companies listed here. Not one of them had any record of events for Maple Crest HOA. They were all billed under your name, Karen. Personal accounts, personal addresses. He held her gaze for a long moment. And you paid them with our money. The room erupted not in shouting, but in a low, dangerous murmur that said people were done being polite. Jonathan didn't even have to call for a vote to remove her. Hands shot up before the motion was finished. Passed unanimously. And just like that, the woman who had ruled over Maple Crest like a petty monarch was stripped of her title. But there was still one more twist. As the meeting adjourned, one of the police officers who had been quietly stationed at the back stepped forward with a folded document. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, "you've been formally served." He handed her a notice civil charges for misappropriation of funds, filed by a group of homeowners who'd banded together after seeing the reports. The look on Karen's face was the kind you don't forget, a mix of disbelief and the slow dawning that the game was over. As for the limo auction money, Luke sent a letter to every mailbox detailing how it was used funding housing repairs for 3 local veterans, supplying school kits for kids, and starting a community garden that now sits on a vacant lot Karen once tried to pave over for visitor parking. Karen, from what I hear, moved out quietly after losing her court case. The new owners of her house showed up to the next block gathering with a plate of brownies and wide eyes, saying, "We've heard stories, we laughed, but we didn't dwell on it." Karen was the past. This was the future. Standing in my driveway one evening, I watched the sun sink behind the rooftops and thought about that first day, the ridiculous note under the wiper, the smug way she'd closed her door on me. Back then, I couldn't have imagined how far this would go, how one act of entitlement would unravel into a complete shift in the balance of our street. But that's the thing about lines, you block them enough times, and people stop stepping back. They step forward. And maybe that's the real lesson here. You can park your limo in someone's driveway, you can throw your weight around with a title, but if enough people decide they're done being passengers, you're going to find yourself walking away alone. So, was I right to sell her limo for charity? Or was that a step too far? I know what I think. The question is, what would you have done?